So we did, a couple of years of work around the energetic communication interactions between people in the local environment, in the living room or here in the lab, obviously. So the next step, where we're putting a lot of our research these days, is both on the social side, the interaction between groups of people and facilitating that, but also the global level of this. So what I'm suggesting here is that just like we've shown that through the magnetic field environment, the Hartz field environment, there is clearly communication going on between people locally, but it's also happening globally. Now this can sound stretchy to some, but there's actually a surprising and growing amount of evidence for this. So one of our hypotheses here, one of our key hypotheses in the Global Coherence Initiative or Global Coherence work is that the magnetic field of the Earth is the carrier wave. So earlier I was talking about how cell phones use magnetic fields to carry information from the phone to the cell tower and so on, really any communication device. So what I'm suggesting here is the magnetic field of the Earth does the same thing. It serves the same way. And that we're all living systems, actually, not just humans, but our pets, our animals, plants, trees are all connected. We're all embedded within the Earth's magnetic field, right? And that the magnetic fields of our heart are coupling to the magnetic field of the Earth. So it's the carrier wave that distributes that information globally. So that there's quite literally, if this is correct, a global information field that we're all contributing to every second, every moment of the day. Now this can sound kind of wild, but let me give you an example here. So if we take this little tennis ball here, say this is the Earth. So the Earth has what's called the geomagnetic field.
Can you, yeah,
right?
the logo is towards you.
Yeah. So this is the Earth, and we know that the Earth has what's called the geomagnetic field, which is a pure magnetic field. It's like a magnet you stick on a refrigerator. Right? It's a static or a stationary field, and we have a North Pole and a South Pole, and the field is radiating out around space many, many times the diameter of the Earth, hundreds of thousands of miles. So this is the field our compass is tuned into, right, to tell us which way is which. So it's a static field. So its strength isn't really changing much for our day-to-day lives. It changes, but it's over hundreds and thousands of years. So I don't wake up in the morning worried about the magnetic field changing. So now the way this quite literally works is if you think of these magnetic fields like guitar strings. Now let's go back to science class. I think almost everyone got to dump iron filings at some point in science class on a glass plate, and you put a magnet under it. You kind of tap it, and they all magically move and line up. But if you remember, they lined up in lines, didn't they? It wasn't this homogeneous black blob. They come into these lines that show you the shape of the field of the magnet. You can move it around, and they all go with it, and all kind of fun. Same thing with the Earth's magnetic field. These are technically called flux lines, or magnetic field lines. So as I was mentioning, think of these like guitar strings, because this is how they literally act. So what's plucking the strings, the field lines, is the solar wind. So Earth is turning, right? And you have the solar wind, which is the high energy particles that are blown out of the sun, not the photons that we see as the daytime. And in fact, the solar wind on a quiet day, which travels about 1 million miles per hour, is rushing by, and it literally pushes in the magnetic field of the Earth on the daytime side, and it stretches it out. Some of you might remember that from science class. I had to relearn it because I forgot all that stuff from high school. But anyway, as the Earth is turning in that, and so is the sun, and the solar wind's rushing by, it's plucking the strings. And just like a guitar, when you pluck the string, it vibrates. And it vibrates at a specific note or frequency. And you change the tension of the string, and you change the note, right, the frequency. Well, as it turns out that the length of the field lines of Earth have a resonant frequency of what's called 0.1 hertz. There's many, but one of the primary resonant frequencies is 0.1 hertz. Now that's important because when I was talking about our hearts, the rhythms of our heart, when we're in that coherent heart rhythm, which is the natural rhythm our heart's in when we're feeling things like love and appreciation, positive, just feeling good, the frequency is 0.1 hertz. So the rhythms of the human heart, natural rhythms, especially when we're in a positive state and feeling good, is exactly the same as one of the primary resonant frequencies of Earth. Now the technical term for what I'm describing are called field line resonances. Kind of describes itself. The field line is resonating and vibrating. So, and you can, but all of these resonant frequencies of Earth, dependent upon the pressure of the solar wind and so on, all overlap the same region and frequencies of our nervous system, of our heart rhythms. Now there's another element here. So we've got our Earth. Now, also around Earth, a different set of magnetic frequencies that's also very relevant for our work in global coherence. So if you think of Earth, surrounding Earth is like a soap bubble, and that's called the ionosphere. So this is a layer of highly ionized gas in our atmosphere. It starts about 50 miles up, and it's very thin if you think global scales. It's about, it goes out to about 100 miles, 150, depending upon conditions. This highly ionized layer called the ionosphere, which is a plasma, which is considered the fourth state of matter in physics. So plasmas have a lot of very unique properties and things they do. One of those is that the bottom of the ionosphere is like a mirror to magnetic waves. So when magnetic waves get created around the Earth, they hit the ionosphere and bounce off, and bounce back and forth between the Earth around the planet. And this, in fact, this is how, if you're familiar with ham or radio operators, it's exactly how this works. Is you send your radio signal up to the ionosphere, it hits it, it bounces off. So that's how somebody over here can talk to somebody over here on the other side of the planet, right? You bounce it off the ionosphere, okay? Because the radio signals won't go through the Earth. So anyway, when these magnetic waves get created in this cavity between the ionosphere and the Earth, and they're the right dimension, if you will, wavelength, frequency to fit in this cavity, they become what are technically called globally propagating standing waves. So let me translate that to people speak. They're everywhere all the time, right? And those are called Schumann resonances. And that's after a guy who first predicted their existence mathematically, and these were first measured in about 1960 with very crude equipment back then. And so in our research, we've had to put magnetometer sites all around the Earth to measure these two things I'm describing, the Schumann resonances. And the Schumann resonances, it's also need to mention here, are important because they overlap our brainwave frequencies. So the first Schumann resonant frequency is around 8.7 hertz, 8.73. But there's 8 of them. There's 8 Schumann resonances. A lot of people that hear about Schumann resonances, and they just hear about the first one and think that's all there is. There's really 8. All 8 of them overlap brainwave frequencies. Now the power, if you will, or the magnitude of the Schumann resonances is much smaller than the field line resonances I was describing. Much, much smaller. And they kind of ride on top of the field line resonances if you look at them spectrally. So the big rhythms of the Earth are the ones that overlap our heart. It's kind of, I think it's really interesting that in the human body, the heart's the big field and the brain's the smaller one. Almost exactly the same in Earth. You've got the big field line resonances that are the same as the heart frequency, and then the Schumanns, which are the same as the brain, which are much smaller in amplitude. So back to science class for again, if I may. Well, so if we go back to science class, most people also got to, at some point in their, their studies to play with tuning forks. So we have, 2 tuning forks, the same tune to the same frequency. And by the way, I should mention that tuning forks are highly coherent systems. Without coherence, you can't have resonance, which is the principle that we got to play with there. So you tap one tuning fork and you see that the other one starts to vibrate, even though you didn't touch it, right? So that's showing the principle of resonance, or really resonance transfer is really what that's showing. That in the case of our tuning forks, we have air molecules. We're vibrating the fork, and the air vibrates and goes over, and because the other tuning fork is resonant, it starts to vibrate in unison with it. This principle works exactly the same way with magnetic fields, only you don't need the air molecules. Again, I'll use the cell phone analogy. Right in this room around us now, there are probably 100 cell phone calls going on, the electromagnetic signals. And if we get our phone out, how does it know the one that we want to tune into, to hear? Well, quite literally, we tune the input of the receiver to have the same resonance as the frequency of interest. And as soon as we have the resonant tuned right, boom, you transfer the energy and information from these invisible magic magnetic waves in the air into the receiver, and there's our conversation going on. So it's really not a big jump to understand how we're the same resonant frequency, both brain and heart, as Earth. And through resonant coupling, that we can transfer energy and information, thoughts, emotions, intuitions, between us and the Earth's field environment, right? So one of the things that I always encourage people, if they really understand what is going on here, to start considering is, what am I feeding the field? How much of the day was spent really feeling kindness, appreciation for life, whatever it is, I have a home, versus frustration or irritation, impatience because my to-do list isn't getting done. Because I'm really saying it all counts. We're always all feeding the field. And it's really wonderful. There's more and more, it seems like every few weeks or month, a new group is forming, or a new organization to bring people together, to come together in groups, to be more conscious of this, whether it's prayer groups or meditation groups, different types of these kind of things, which is wonderful. Because we also know from a scientific perspective that there really is an amplification effect when we, especially if we're in a coherent state together with a shared intention, it amplifies the signal we're radiating. And so it's wonderful that people get together once a month or whatever, or once a week to have these events. But what about the rest of the time? Right? So that's what it's really about, I think, for the shift that we're helping to facilitate here through the global coherence work, is really becoming more self-responsible and conscious of what I'm feeding the field. And increasing the ratios. Of course, nobody's going to walk around always beaming appreciation and love. That's not what I'm saying. But we can become more responsible for what we're feeding the field and kind of shift that ratio. So we're starting to take more responsibility for our own emotional diet, our own health and happiness, right? And that's, I'm seeing as more and more people really understand this, it helps them become more responsible. Because it's not because what I'm really suggesting here is what we're thinking, feeling, doesn't just happen inside of us. It happens out here too, and it actually happens globally.